So recently, and by recently I mean on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, who was an African American man, was murdered by a white cop in Minneapolis who pressed his knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes 46 seconds straight. And he died. I'm not gonna play the clip. There were 3 other officers surrounding him, but none of them really stepped up and stopped Derek from murdering Floyd. He died then and there. He was dead. There's no ambiguity here. There is no explanation for this other than a power trip. This was murder. There is no explanation for this. There just isn't. And because of George's death, there are now multiple protests and riots that have started because of George. And I stand in solidarity with these protesters because this is not okay. However, having said that, is George's death really the reason why thousands and thousands of people are protesting right now and a lot of people are rioting? Is George's death really the reason why Minneapolis is on fire right now? Let's just be real here. Nobody on this earth is that heavily invested in one random civilian's murder whose life was taken by this one random cop. Nobody is really that invested in this one person's life to go out and riot. Okay, let's just be real here. Okay, so then the question would be, well, why the hell are people rioting? Why the hell are people protesting? Let's look at George and his case first. Let's take a look at that cop that murdered George. This cop had 18 fucking complaints against him. And did you know that 2 of them were actually about open firing on civilians? Who would have guessed? Who in this universe could have guessed that this cop would go ahead and commit a crime? Who would have thought of that? This was a complete shock to all of us. And the remaining cops, the cops that just watched George being murdered, yeah, they also had fucking complaints against them. And nothing really happened. Nothing really happened until, a guy was murdered. Of course. That's the threshold, right? That's the threshold. And this is the problem with cops. It's not just that, oh, there are some bad cops, but there are a lot of good cops as well. That's not really the problem. The problem is the system's inability to hold the bad cops accountable. It's not just that, oh, there are some bad cops, but there are a lot of good cops as well. That's not really the issue. The issue is the system's inability to meaningfully address the bad behavior of the cops. Now let's look at this article, which is really fascinating, about Minneapolis Police Department. And yes, I got this from Wash's live stream. This was written in 2017, and here's what the article says. Black people, including African American and people of East African descent, make up 18% of the population in Minneapolis and 40% of the stops included in MPD's dashboard. When it comes to investigative stops, which theoretically requires a reasonable suspicion of misconduct, Black people were stopped more than twice as often as whites. In instances where a person was searched, 62% were Black. In vehicle searches, 63%. 44% of those stopped for moving violations and 53% of those stopped for equipment violations were Black. 51% of people on receiving end of citations were Black, and 57% of people booked as part of an arrest were Black. Okay, now, even if I give you that Black people commit more crime, which statistically is true, and it's because poverty is a great indicator of crime, and Black people are more likely to be poor because of, slavery, Jim Crow, etc. You get it. But even if I give you that Black people commit more crime, do you actually think that oh, black people are just worse drivers than white people. That really shows the bias here in Minneapolis Police Department, isn't it? Like, that really shows the bias here against black people. This is the reason why people are protesting. I don't think that it's just because of George's death. Yes, George's death was the spark that lit Minneapolis on fire, but it was not the cause of these protests and these riots. The cause is systemic racism, like I've showed over here. Nobody can look me in the eye and say that black people are worse driving than white people. You can't do that. That's no. The cause of these riots is because of, well, people have had enough of systemic racism. When people usually think of riots, they think of everybody has gone crazy, people are now killing people on streets. Like, that's not what usually riots look like. Riots usually harm property and not people. Having said that, I do believe that riots are bad and they do a lot of harm. If you don't want riots to happen like you should focus on what caused those riots in the first place in order to prevent them. Riots don't usually just come out of nowhere. You know, people who are usually happy and content with their lives, they don't usually riot. Riots are a natural response of people who have been subject to certain socioeconomic conditions, like I talked about before, like systemic racism and poverty. And these things we don't usually see from the outside. As we're looking at the situation from the outside, we see, one man was killed by this one cop. And oh my God, everybody lost their minds and Minneapolis is on fire right now. That's what we see from the outside. But what we don't see is decades of poverty and systemic racism. This is something that we don't see from the outside, but black people who are living in Minneapolis, oh yeah, they fucking know. They know this. They know this very well, that their police department is racist as shit, and when given a chance, would shoot them at any given moment. This is something that we don't see from the outside. This is something that we don't see. What we are seeing from the outside is, hey, Minneapolis is on fire right now. But the decades of racism, oh yeah, that's something that we don't see. Rioting doesn't happen when people are generally happy and content with life. Rioting only exists when the situation is dire enough for people to feel like rioting is the only way that they can express the discontent that they have with the system itself and the circumstances that they have been subjected to for decades. Normal, happy people usually don't fucking riot. Rioting happens when people feel like the only way that they can express the discontent that they have is through rioting. Now, let me show you what I mean using memes, of course. This is from the National Review. They say here, Kaepernick should drop the silly national anthem protest and get to work. And this is what they tweeted yesterday. Protesting works. Rioting doesn't. I think that summarizes everything. I think that condenses the reason why people are rioting right now better than anything else that I've seen online. People tried fucking protesting peacefully. People tried that. And nothing happened. Nothing changed. They tried it peacefully. Nothing changed. And now people feel like they can't express their discontent with the systemic racism. They have now turned to rioting because peaceful protesting didn't work. It didn't change anything. And that is why condemning the rioters doesn't actually prevent riots from happening. Rioting only takes place when the situation is dire enough for people to feel like the only way that they can express their discontent is through rioting. So shaming rioters when they are already in a dire state, that does nothing. That does nothing. They are not responding, they are reacting to the decades of systemic racism that have left them fucking disempowered. They are reacting to the material circumstance that they have been subjected to. The same circumstance, if you or I were subjected to, we would also riot. There's a great analogy that I can compare this to. I think it was PRX who I heard this from. Okay. The analogy is this. Imagine an abuse victim living with their abuser for decades, and one day they have an outburst against their abuser. Now, technically speaking, what the abuse victim did there was wrong. Yeah, by having that outburst, yes, that was wrong. But condemning the person who is abused for that reaction that they have, that doesn't sit right? That would be wrong and would be misdirected, because the real problem was not, the abuse victim had the outburst. The real problem was the abuser. Similarly, condemning the rioters for having a reaction of material circumstance and systemic racism would be misdirected, because the real problem wasn't that people are rioting. The real problem was, say it with me, systemic racism. And condemning the rioters actually shifts the blame away from the causes of those riots, systemic discrimination and systemic racism, yeah. It shifts the blame away from the causes to the people who are having a reaction to that discrimination. Just like condemning the abuse victim for having that reaction to the abuser would be shifting the blame away from the abuser and to the abused. Get it? I hope that you guys understand this. Think about the person who would condemn the abuse victim in that situation. It would be like, hey, yeah, you fuckhead, you didn't spoke up about the decades of abuse that the victim went through, but no, suddenly when the victim has a little outburst, oh no, that is when you have the moral obligation to speak up. You didn't do that for decades, but no, just when the victim had a little outburst, oh no, that is when you have the moral obligation to fucking speak up. And I believe that is similar to this situation as well. People who have never fucking spoken up about police brutality or systemic racism, those people have now the moral obligation to speak up and speak up passionately about how awful the rioters are and to condemn them, when in fact, if they were subjected to the same material conditions as the rioters, they would also riot. And again, don't get me wrong here. Riots are bad. They are very fucking bad. They are harmful. They do a lot of harm. However, if you want to prevent riots from happening, if you have a problem with people who are rioting, you should focus on what caused those riots in the first place. You should focus on the systemic discrimination, because condemning the rioters does nothing. Rioting only takes place when the situation is dire enough for people to feel like the only way that they can express their discontent is through rioting. So shaming rioters when they are already in a dire state, that does nothing. That does nothing. And is counterproductive. Just saying that, the people who did riots are bad and rioters are bad people, that is a very simple analysis of the situation. And the most that you can get out of it, people who riot are bad and they are bad people and they should be locked up. Or, you can also go down the racist path, But there's not much that you can get out of that analysis. It doesn't address the cause of the riots. It does nothing to prevent riots from happening. Just condemning the rioters doesn't work. What exactly do you think we would accomplish by condemning the rioters? Like I've said before, rioting only takes place when the situation is dire enough for people to feel like the only way that they can express their discontent is through rioting. So shaming rioters when they are already in a dire state, like that does nothing. That does nothing. So shaming the rioters doesn't actually accomplish anything. Now, I don't know how to end this. Okay, I'm gonna end this by saying most of the protests that are happening right now, they're peaceful. They're non-violent. Most of the protests that are happening, they are non-violent. However, on television and on the media, you are more likely to see a few examples of non-violent protests being sensationalized. And it reminds me of this cartoon. And yes, again, this is stolen from Wash. I love him, okay? Fuck off. It says right here, I plan to lead another non-violent march tomorrow. It's MLK saying this, and do you get the joke? You see, it doesn't look non-violent. That's a joke. That's the joke. So yeah, I don't know how to end this. I really don't know how to end this. Okay, so this was an explicitly political video. I don't know how well this is going to be received, but if I have to go by the people who follow me on Twitter and people who comment on my videos, I would say that the reaction can't be that bad. So yeah, like this video if you liked it. Comment your thoughts down below about what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? It's okay, we can agree to disagree on certain things. It's fine. Subscribe for more videos. And yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful day today. And please, for the love of God, do not touch your face. And if you're gonna protest, be safe.